Hey guys, welcome back to the Scottsdale Living podcast. Today we're going to dive into something that's kind of really neat and interesting, especially to me as a real estate broker. We got Keith Galbett, who's the owner of Advocate RCA, and a little bit of a niche business. It's a little different than what's out there that people think of, but they guide you through the process of building high-end luxury homes. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
You guys take the bull by the horns, so to speak, right? So instead of going to a builder and he handles the rest, or going to an architect, you guys kind of pull that all together. Is that right?
That's right. Well, what we do is really look at how to optimize the process for the owner.
Right.
And we have then developed best practices and an approach to take every component part of the build process and break it into its appropriate pieces and then help to guide it.
Yeah.
And so we act with the owner at the center of our world and then seek to assemble the right team and help manage and work with the team so it optimizes the process.
Right. So, I've heard horror stories from some owners. They want to take this on by themselves. And man, it could lead to years of frustration and hassles, right? You guys kind of cut that out.
Well, it's a challenging process, right? And it's a process that's filled with lots of emotion and lots of dreams and lots of financial obligations. And so we've been around the block. We've seen it many, many times. And so we look to optimize that and do, frankly, a really good job at it. It's still a hard process, though, and still involves a lot of dedication, a lot of time. But when done correctly, it creates a lot more value, reduces risk, reduces stress, makes everyone's lives better.
Yep.
And the reason I started the business is I've been a practicing lawyer for about a little now over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I still run that firm. And I would commonly have people, commonly meaning every week for years and years and years, come in with some version of it not working well and how do we fix it. And so it occurred to me that there was a much better way. And that's why we started the business about 8 years ago.
I love that. So that's kind of what led you to it, was all the people coming to you with their issues, obviously, right?
Yeah. Yes. Seeing that there were steps made, decisions made that were not in the correct sequence or not fully thought out. And then recognizing, hey, there's a better way for us to do this. Let's seek to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And in our view, the best businesses and the best services are created in order to solve a problem. And so that's why it was established. And currently we're working on north of 40 projects.
Oh, wow. At one time, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Man.
Yeah.
So did that kind of take over the law business at the law firm? Or?
Well, I'm very fortunate. I split my time between both, but I'm very fortunate to have really great team members in both places. And so we've worked very hard at developing really a great team, and so that's how we're able to do it, and how I'm able to split my time.
So when you first launched this, was there competition? Because it seems to me, I've really never heard of this process,
Yeah. So in the commercial space, you might be familiar, there's owners reps are commonly used to represent the development side of projects. And they have their own approach and kind of role and responsibility. And in some ways, there's some correlation, but we're very different. The home building process, as you know, is a much more custom, much more emotional process that's not built for ROI in the same way. Certainly, adding value is really key to the process, but that's not the sole focus, which on the development side, it
functionality and hominess and all the rest of the stuff.
What our family wants and how we want to live, and our broader family and how they're integrated into it. And so there are people in the commercial space that will sometimes work in the residential space, but rarely. There are some kind of home builders or retired home builders that will provide owner's rep role, but frankly, no one, not only here, but really throughout the United States, that has developed the suite of services and the approach that we take. And we have no idea why that's the case. It doesn't make any sense to us as to why it hasn't been done in other markets. But that's what we're seeking to do.
Yeah, no, I love it. So the majority of your business, your 40 projects right here in the Valley?
The majority are. We're now in a process of expansion, and we have we're serving other markets as well. We have a great teammate that's in the Coachella Valley, Southern California area. We're currently bringing in someone in the South Florida area. And we also dispatch our people from here. A lot of the work as part of the management and day-to-day can be done here. And then we'll dispatch people to the site for site inspections and reviews with the clients and that kind of thing. But the majority of our projects are here.
Okay.
And we're really enjoying it.
So how does the process start? I mean, traditionally, a luxury guy that wants to build a luxury house, go out, either find himself a builder, find himself an architect, or a real estate agent, find the piece of property. Do you guys kind of do all of that, or you jump in the middle, or where's it start?
So what we do is help to curate the process. So we're huge believers in hiring the best in each of the areas that you've identified. And we don't play in or step into those spaces. We will consult and advise based on us doing a lot of projects, but it starts often with site selection, so the identification of the right parcel or home, and in that we're bringing in the realty team. We're often, sometimes clients will have their chosen realtor. That's great. To the extent that they want help in identifying that, we'll help to put together a list of folks who we think could really serve the client. We'll go through an interview process and help the selection there. And we go through that process with architecture, with interiors, with engineering. And so our goal, we don't pick and choose who the favorites are. We advise the owner based on the skills and the capabilities and the objective information. And we seek to bring all of the important information that the client needs to consider to them, make sure that the right questions are being asked, and then work with the client to help make that selection. And then we make that happen. And so typically we go through a site selection process, then we go through a team assembly process, we call it, which is the bringing in of all of those different folks. And then we will establish the initial budgeting and programming for the project, because it's really important that budget's established early, and that's a guide for the whole project. That's where a lot of residential projects fail, is starts out with a misunderstanding of what it's going to be.
And you wanted toilets?
And then it evolves, and it's great ideas are presented. Yes, I'd like that. Yes, I'd like that. Yes, I'd like that. And suddenly the project is 50, 100% over budget. And then there's this very uncomfortable and not fun process of trying to get it back to where it should have been. And so the method that we take is to, from the beginning, really try to right size the project, right size the team, make sure there's alignment for everyone, and then work with them to keep the train on the track in the way that it was originally set out. And if a client says, "Hey, I do want to make that change," I mean, we're not going to stand in the way of it. But we're trying to be stewards for them of their objectives, and trying to avoid going back to that other process.
So rewind it 8 years. You come out of the gate. Project one, you probably didn't have all the systems and process and checks in place. So it's kind of a learning curve, right?
100%.
Yeah. So how did that first one go down?
So the first project, if I were to think of kind of the first significant project that we did, was a project, unfortunately, that a very close friend of ours engaged in, where the contractor engaged in fraud. And so there was an unwinding of that fraud, and then a right sizing of the team and bringing in a new general contractor in order to complete the project. And the way it really started was very naturally. Friends and clients said, "Hey," they come over to the house. "Hey, can you help me do this?" And that's how it originally started. And so I applied the principles I've learned as a lawyer, the principles I've learned as a commercial, watching commercial owners, reps, and knowing where a lot of the mistakes happen, and helping to really guide them. The way the business has evolved over time is through really working hard at establishing best practices and continually improving those. And every day we're learning. Every day we're doing a little better. So so it's a very different business today than it was then.
I'm sure. Yeah. So, I mean, you guys in simplicity, kind of like a high-level project manager for the whole thing.
Yes, that's right.
So what drives it now? I mean, obviously, when you put a luxury home builder in a room with a luxury home buyer and a realtor and an architect and trades and interior designers, everybody's got an opinion, right? So, I mean, how do you guys manage that process? I mean, I assume it's, a software-driven thing, checks and balances, but is there all systems in place that it kind of flows through?
Yeah, so a lot of it is systems, but a lot of it's human touch, and a lot of it goes back to the assembly of the right team. What is the client's real objectives? How does it vary between the two spouses, if there are two spouses? Hiring the right team that really seeks to understand what those objectives are. We have some clients that are building for spec. We have some clients that are building for their forever home. We have some clients that are building for 2 to 3 years. They want to build it, live in it for 2 years, and maybe do it again.
Sure.
And so each of those has its own sets of requirements and objectives. And so it's about establishing those, I think, and then really hiring the team that wants to understand that and will work collaboratively with everyone else. Where a lot of the breakdown occurs, as I'm sure you know, is where there's ego or there's a misalignment between one of those different groups and the owner. And that's where it becomes challenging quickly. And often not until the cake is in the oven, right? And then it becomes more difficult to deal with. So it goes back to that. And then I think we're doing so many projects. We know most of the great builders, architects, designers, et cetera. And we work to really cultivate the right team that kind of sees that vision and is willing to be a problem solver. And then it's a matter of really managing at every step, every iterative step to that outcome.
Yeah. An interesting thing I saw reading through your website is like you guys don't necessarily have your builder or your architect. You work with whoever the home buyer is comfortable with for the most part, right?
Yeah, no, it's the opposite, really, right? So we certainly have folks we've worked with we like a lot and that we think a lot of, but we are open in every circumstance to whatever the owner wants. And our objective is, as a fiduciary to the owner, to help them understand what their options are, how those options tie into their objectives, and then help them make good decisions. But we don't drive those outcomes. We certainly have opinions, but we don't drive them. So it is unique. I think a lot of the development community kind of assemble a team and package it together. We have a very different core value around that. Like our view is that that each decision should be made with eyes wide open, and it should be the decision that's best for the client. And sometimes that leads to the same team, but most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So now with 40 projects going on, how does it work for the buyer? Are they assigned like their own project manager, or is it at different positions as they go through the process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we call our project managers project advocates. And so we have senior project advocates and project advocates, which is kind of think of it as a senior project manager, and then a more mid-level. And then we also have support folks that are under them. And so usually always on a project, there is a senior project advocate and then a support project advocate and then a lower level project support person. And those people as a group work to manage and advance the project on behalf of the owner.
So you guys kind of started a little bit, maybe a couple of years before COVID, right? So how did that affect business?
So COVID, in terms of new projects and the growth of the business, was tremendous. I mean, it was
kind of weird, right? The way it worked out for real estate.
Inversely correlated, I think, at least to what I would have expected. I thought more people would be.
It was terrifying when it first happened, then it ended up being fantastic.
You'd think human nature would be a lot of being cautious, and certainly there was a lot of that. But there was a lot of people willing to make life changes. And we, of course, live in an amazing place.
They're coming here.
We're very lucky.
Right?
And so for those reasons, it was great. In terms of managing these projects, in terms of construction costs, in terms of the economics of these projects, it was extraordinary, and it continues to be a very extraordinary period.
The supply chain changed a lot, didn't it?
It tremendously, and in ways that were predictable and ways that weren't. And even commodities, lumber, which had been fluctuating but relatively steady and in kind of a band of normalcy, shot up, shot down, shot up, shot down, and so how all those things interact, and then the timing of supply chain, and then constraints on the generals and subs in terms of people, all led to let's call them unique challenges. And so that was a big part of what we had to adapt to, adjust to, figure out solutions to, and in large part, it's about setting the right course and then adjusting to things that change, trying to lock down things when we could, in terms of locking down pricing, entering into contracts, dialing in some of those risks, which we learned a lot around. And it's something that, frankly, the generals had never experienced. The subs
the world
had never experienced. The world had never experienced. And so there was lots of learning. But there's a ton of, there's just a lot of really brilliant and smart people and capable people in this space. And the best ones all found ways to mitigate risk and dial in things well.
So tell me a little bit about how far do you get down into the minutia? I mean, are you helping GCs find subs, or are you helping an architect get plans approved? What level of degree are you in on that?
Yeah, so we are believers that you hire great people,
yep,
and you let them do great work. We over time have identified a number of areas where the ball can get dropped, where it can delay time, where there can be big implications in terms of cost, and so we work to shore those up, but always with those professionals at the center. And
right.
so, like an example would be Paradise Valley House, Hillside, the complexities associated with. We know how that process works.
Sure.
We will coordinate with and support the architectural and engineering team and the town in helping to get things done, get things through. And we can anticipate, because we've been around it a bunch, where things can get challenging.
Sure.
And we will anticipate when there will be a response. We'll make sure the whole team is coordinated to respond as quickly as possible. And so that's an example of kind of us pushing the project along, anticipating what it is. And certainly there are architects who have done a lot of hillside work and ones who have done less. Same with engineering. And so we will work to really supplement the team in helping to make that happen.
Sure.
In terms of costs, or the general contractors will typically present their preferred group. They will often, we will, as a requirement, have them go out and bid at multiple levels. But we also have really strong internal cost data
Sure.
for all the projects that we've worked on, plus projects that we have good relationships with generals who share their data with us,
sure.
where we can say, okay, on a per square foot level 5 drywall, what should it cost? Okay, we look at the numbers
sure.
that have come in, and we can check all of those things, which is, I think we're really the only group in our community who has that diverse of data in the luxury construction space,
right,
to really be able to test cost information real time. Most in most cases, the best anyone can get to is what that general contractor's
right.
set of experiences is. But we have the ability to draw on a much bigger pool, which really helps us see really what costs are and should be, and help then us shore up those areas where there's outliers. And we do that. We'll work with the general and say, okay, look, numbers are reasonable on all of these areas. Maybe there's even a scope missing. Let's look into it, because our goal is not. Our goal is to be as accurate as possible. And so sometimes there's missing scope, and then sometimes there's duplicative scope that we help ferret out. In some cases, just the cost numbers that came back are too high.
Right.
And so we'll say, okay, on this issue, we need to go back and get some additional bids. Here are some folks you might want to go talk to.
Right.
And, the GCs drive that process. They're in charge of the means and methods to make it happen. But we are trying to help everyone perform better.
Right. And it's probably a little counterintuitive, but I would imagine when people first think about what you guys do, it probably sounds to them like, oh, I'm just adding another fee on top of my build. But I would imagine that with what you guys do and the data you have, you actually probably end up saving money versus not hiring you.
Our view is it's typically a 5 to 15 to 1 return on the investment paid to us in terms of reduced risk, reduced cost, speed. We also help with helping to competitively bid the construction financing side. So owner says, okay, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be a $5 million build, $3 million build. We'll help go and chop the financing side, which is often good for an eighth or a quarter.
Sure.
We help with all the cost side. We help make sure all the insurance is in place and proper, builder's risk.
Right.
It's amazing. I mean, we're working on very extraordinary projects, and sometimes we're brought in and there isn't any builder's risk insurance in place.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, some crazy things.
Right.
And that if the owner understood what those risks were, they would never have allowed that to be an oversight. So we bring those best practices. We help look at it collectively in terms of risk and cost. And we're very fortunate at this stage, as the business has grown, that the design team, the architectural team, and the general contractors really bring their A game when they have an opportunity, or we have an opportunity to all work together. And that's worth a lot of value to the client.
Right. So where was I headed with that one real quick? So give me a little idea of what cities are the best to build in versus what's a little challenging.
I would say they each have their own kind of nuances, but they all want to do a good job.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is understanding what their needs are and then accommodating it and making sure that what's being presented is consistent with what their needs are.
Sure.
And the most experience we have is probably Paradise Valley, Scottsdale, and Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly some cities in the East Valley would be the primary municipalities, I would say. And I would say in general, they're very similar. I mean, Phoenix is a much bigger place.
Right.
And so there's a little more navigation in terms of getting to the right folks, but they're by and large, in fact, universally, the people who work for those communities and are trying to do that work are really trying to do a good job.
Absolutely.
And they have a job to do and they have demands on them. So it's a matter, I think, largely of kind of making it work efficiently and delivering.
So I got to imagine that sometimes it's not the call where, hey, I want to build a house. It's a call where, hey, I'm building a house and this is a train wreck going on. Do you guys get those phone calls too?
We do. Yeah. So, certainly it's about half of what we do.
Okay.
And we call it project turnaround is the term that we call it.
I like it.
There can be tracks. And they come in lots of different forms. And those were really the kinds of things I saw as a lawyer over a lot of these years. And it's complicated work. And we try to bring the same skill set, the same proactive kind of team-oriented attitude to those. But it's a significant amount of what we see in the community.
Right.
And there are common reasons why. It's usually the things that we talked about were not done. So there was the wrong team assembled, budgets weren't properly established, the project design wasn't conformed to a budget if it was established.
Sure.
There weren't check-ins to budget as, is this reasonable? So the house gets, a typical scenario would be the house gets designed, they hire a contractor, they start building it, the numbers come back and they're totally inconsistent with the budget. And then the owner's like, this is a train wreck. I need to figure out how to right-size this. And that's how we get involved.
Right.
Sometimes while it's under construction, they're adding additional buildings or adding additional features. And, we're big believers in the work that should be done early is really key, the pre-construction work. So there's a lot of best practices that aren't followed. When those aren't followed, that's often when we're brought in. And they're challenging projects because they're usually, and particularly in this cost escalation environment, that's a big part of the stress. Sometimes, and many times, these clients also have lending requirements that are in place. The budgets are already established. They're, in some cases, under better interest rate terms. So they want to limit the amount of cash out of pocket. And so we get involved and work to really shore it up. But those are, we relish in them. We enjoy the work, but we certainly prefer to avoid that, have our clients avoid that.
Well, it sounds like if you guys can lay the foundation up front, it's going to save a lot of headaches.
There's no doubt about it. Yeah. And there's a lot of value in not only in terms of dollars, but just the experience, right? We all have heard these nightmare scenarios and they really can be avoided if people are being dutiful in terms of how they do all the work leading up to it.
Yeah. So the thing that's always been interesting, the luxury home building thing for me is, you get the architect or the draftsman, whoever's got their plans all done, but who's watching the builder? And I know there's amazing builders out there, amazing GCs. Do you guys go to the level like you're doing walkthroughs on site, you're kind of checking through things, or how does that process work?
So we're very fortunate to have some absolutely outstanding builders in the community. And we seek to have great relationships with the builders that we work with. Like we do not seek conflict. We seek to reduce it. If there are issues where things have to be said, then we deal with it, of course. But the goal is to create alignment. But builders are human beings. Builders are under constraints. They have supply chain challenges. They have their businesses to run. And so the selection of who it's going to be and the marriage with the owner is really key. In terms of the construction, we do weekly site visits on all of our projects. Those are typically with the owner and with the builder. Some cases our owners are not in Phoenix all the time or don't live here. And so we will do that with the builder. We record all that information. We record all the pictures. All those get put into our system. So the owner has total visibility as to what's happening. But we get into the detail. We manage change orders, site visits, payment applications, coordinating with the lender. And so We seek to, if there's an issue in the field, there's a conflict between the drawings and the constructability, we bring the team in, help to solve that, document that properly. And so we're very active throughout the process. And some of that's seeing opportunities that come up in the field. Like, hey, the grading and drainage is routed this way. Is this appropriate? Well, we really could do it this way and probably save the client a lot of money or reduce the risk of there being a water issue. And so we'll work together and say, okay, let's facilitate that. Let's move that forward. And so it's a very collaborative process, but we're in the thick of it. We're not just in the office.
Yeah. So what's interesting in the 8 years that you guys have been doing this, and nobody has a crystal ball, obviously, but the luxury home market has really taken off. I mean, the price points have in Phoenix, Silverleaf PV. I mean, you're getting up to 15, 20, $25 million. I saw one in Queen Creek the other day. It was $25 million. And it's like, wow. What do you think is going to happen with that market? Is it can continue grow like that? Do we have the capacity for that?
So it's a great question. It's something I think about all the time.
Sure.
I think that my personal view, I'm born and raised here. I've seen lots of cycles.
Sure.
My dad's been a practicing lawyer for 50 years.
Yeah.
He's seen lots of cycles.
Sure.
I grew up around the cycles, right? As many of us did. And I think the future will continue to have cycles.
Sure.
And we should anticipate them and we should be thoughtful and cognizant, which is why I think our services are really important to help make sure that good decisions are being made all the way throughout. But I do think that COVID and the desirability of living in Arizona and other places throughout the United States. And we see this in Texas.
Yeah.
We see it in Florida.
I think the virtual ability to work really changed a lot of things too.
100%.
Right?
So the technology there, people's interest in livability, I think people's interest in architecture and design and climate really bode well for Arizona. And so I think we're at a new plane. I think there still will be cycles that everyone has to be cognizant of. And in Paradise Valley, for example, the lots that are minted are the lots that are minted. There aren't any more coming.
There's no more dirt.
there's no more coming. And so that creates its own supply demand constraints that creates impact. And Silverleaf and Paradise Valley and a number of other areas, are on a new plane. And I think the ease of doing business here, I think the availability of great healthcare now, I think the availability of really great education and employees are things that have really developed over the last 40 or 50 years in a way that we're at a whole new level. And and that's why we see big businesses coming here. That's why the economic landscape has changed so much. And I think that all is very supportive. If we're talking about the luxury market, I think that there's going to be more opportunity in the next 50 years than there was in the last 50, which says a lot because the last 50 years has been pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's definitely changed quite a bit. So when your clients come to you up front to the start, what is kind of the length of that process? And I know it's a wide open question, but I mean, are we a year build, a 2 year, a 5 year? And I totally understand it's project to project, but what's kind of an average, I would say?
I can get into some specifics. I mean, I think if you take let's say a Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, East Valley flat lot, relatively straightforward civil engineering. And without having to go through a hillside process, I think the design and permitting process, if done well, is a 6 to 9 month process.
Okay.
And then the build time is 15 to 18 or 19 months, depending on the complexity of the build. On the other hand, if we were to take a large hillside project,
where you move a lot of dirt and getting into it,
and lots of grading and drainage work, lots of potentially hard dig work to get the pad established, in addition to all the pre-construction work that has to be done. A year is conservative to really work through that. And then the build are often 18 to 24 months, in some cases more, depending on how complicated the building is. And those numbers can slide pretty quickly if they're not really managed actively.
So another one that I think you guys do, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys will do total high-end remodels as well, right? Because that's a big thing in PV, especially right now. Okay. And that process, similar?
Yeah, that really depends on the scope of the changes, right? So, if the work is being done is really a function of surfaces and there aren't structural, mechanical roof, other kinds of really challenging kind of scopes or components, then it can be pretty straightforward. It's really a function of what's needed in the house. Most of the key to remodels, of course, is the value proposition of the improvements. You know this so well, the value proposition of the improvements relative to the future value of the house. And we also consult and work on that to really help clients understand, okay, if you take it this far, there's really a value proposition for you. If you take it this far, it's probably diminishing relative to other uses, for the property. And we work with the realty teams to help really establish that as well. We also work with some really great appraisers in the city that we bring in to say, okay,
X, Y, Z.
If we do this, this is future value. If we do this, this is future value. And then client can make an informed decision, because that's another part of the remodel challenge is people start going down the path, and then
it starts creeping up on them.
It starts creeping up, and then there's a question, and sometimes there's an inverse relationship to the work that's being done and the future value.
Sure. So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. It may be in your wheelhouse, it may not, but I think it's a big question, especially we have a ton of people moving here from out of state. So I get this question nonstop. What's your take on water in Phoenix, Scottsdale, PV? Obviously things we've had with Rio Verde, but as builders are building more homes, you hear a lot of people say, we don't have the water for that. And then there's the other side. It's like, hey, we're doing a great job of conservation of water. Do you guys kind of look at that? Is that kind of in your scope, or it's really not something you touch?
So it happens to be a personal interest of mine, just being born and raised here. But it doesn't come up too much in the municipalities that we're working in because of their water supply and access. And the kind of big picture, and I don't know how much you want to go down this tangent, but the big picture is, for most of the cities that we've been talking about, the water supply and water situation, particularly this year, is really, really strong.
Right.
And in fact, we have more rainfall than can be captured by our systems at present. And so we're not even grabbing all of it, for its use. That is not the case for some of the outlying communities where, in order for them to be developable, they need to meet certain constraints or certain requirements. And that, in my personal view, is completely appropriate.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the big focus is going to be in the coming decades is really water usage per home, water usage per person, and water usage really in the agricultural space, because the vast majority of our water is used as agricultural,
right?
and on a per use basis, water usage is actually down. So people are doing a better job, and in many cases the infrastructure is very strong. But we do live in a time of warming and these really unusual cycles of drought, and
it's a desert,
and it's a desert. So it's certainly an appropriate and important topic. I would say that in the areas that we're doing our projects, it comes up less, just because there is availability and it's quite strong.
Sure, absolutely. So that's Keith Galbert with Advocate RCA. So give us all your stuff. Where do people find you? How do they get a hold of you? How do they hire you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Gotcha.
So our website is www.advocate-rca.com. If you type in Advocate Residential Construction Advisors, it'll pop straight up. You can find us on all the main social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, where we have lots of our projects, links to pictures and videos, and seeing our process in place.
Cool.
And our physical offices in Scottsdale and Scottsdale Road, kind of embedded where the new Ritz is being constructed in the Scottsdale Spectrum.
Sure. Cool. So that's Keith with Advocate RCA. It's been great having you, man. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
You bet.